Hi ladies and gentlemen, this is the video that I talked about in the last video, and I've decided to call it God and Sex. I mean, I might as well just call it what it's going to be about. You know, sex between a man and a woman is supposed to be exquisite, binding, and if you really understand how the ancient prophets looked at it, the union of mankind. Let's say that you're a prophet or you're praying and you have this connection to God. They described it as ecstasy. Ecstasy. Which is, by the way, what good sex with someone you love is. It's ecstasy. If it isn't, then there's something wrong. Okay? So, what am I saying? I'm saying that the union between a man and a woman, a sexual union, should be emotional things there too. I'm not saying sex for gratification as the principal reason for it. In other words, I'm not saying sex for sex's sake or merely for pleasure. I'm saying between people that love each other. Okay, there's an ecstasy there, and it's very much like what the prophets and holy men said they experience when they have a union with God. And God wanted us to have that same feeling. Of course, it's a little different, but it can be very much the same to the one that we love. Sex wasn't an afterthought of God, okay? Right in the first chapter of Genesis, it talks about God making mankind male and female. And I would like to go on a whole dissertation on the differences between first and second Genesis, but that's not really important. What's important here is that this whole thing started with God. And there are those who will say, well, God meant the male and female aspects of a soul. Hey, I'm sorry, but if you understand the scripture, that's really not the case. And the second chapter of Genesis, this is really important. When they're in the material world, they haven't fallen because of a sin yet. By the way, that sin was not sex between Adam and Eve. That wasn't it. Okay? They hadn't fallen yet, and God had told them to multiply and replenish the earth in a state where they couldn't die. Oh, angels in the Apocrypha and in the Gnostic Gospels and places like that came down and had sex with women. Angels aren't supposed to be able to have sex. The scriptures say they can. But it's the manner in which it occurs that makes a difference. Okay, where I want to go with this is what's happened to Christianity. Christianity has said, and I blame Christianity a lot for the problems with people's sexual identity today. The homosexuality, the transgenderism, those types of things, because they've put down that really wonderful relationship between a man and a woman to such an extent that a lot of young people in particular, if they go along with that, they're afraid to let those feelings out and to show those attractions and those emotions. I lay that right square at the doorstep of Christianity, especially in the early Catholic Church that then prohibited their priests from marrying. Celibacy became the big deal. So at any rate, that's been a problem. So right off the bat, we've put sex in a place where it's supposed to cause guilt. Why? Because it's a tool by those in charge, the priests between you and God, to say you're guilty of something because you have these feelings and these desires, which God put there in the first place. They're not just animal. Matter of fact, they're not animal at all. Okay. So, where am I going? Well, the Christians in particular who have this problem with sex always come up with a few scriptures that they like to use to show that, you know, God doesn't really like the idea of men and women, males and females in a sexual context being resurrected or in the heavens. I heard Hal Lindsey in his book, The Late Great Planet Earth, he says, well, yeah, when we get on the other side, we're going to look at somebody who had been a member of the opposite sex. He totally disregarded the whole plan of exaltation and salvation by what he said, because somehow sex has become wrong in the eyes of a lot of Christians. Where do they get that? Basically from 3 scriptures in the New Testament, and I'm going to read those, not word for word, but just let you know where they are. Matthew 22:25 starts there and it goes on for a few verses. And Luke 20:29 and goes on for a few verses. And basically, you have to understand the historical context of what Jesus is answering here. His answer, before I tell you what the question was, his answer was, in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels in heaven. Kind of the key there is to know, well, what are the angels in heaven like? Okay? And which class of angels on top of that? But what really caused him to answer it in that fashion? And this is where it gets important to understand. There are a couple of key events here that you need to be aware of. The first is this. The Sadducees who asked that question of him did not believe in a resurrection in the first place. So they're kind of mocking it, okay? And when you mock something, you don't deserve the benefits of it. So basically, the number one thing here is when the Sadducees say, well, you know, there was this lady, this man who was married to this lady, and he died, and then she was married again, and then that guy died, and this guy died, and then she married again, and this guy died. It goes on until, 7 men, died after having it. Whose wife is she in the resurrection? There are some things at play here that people that don't really understand the history of it don't see. The first is this. In Leviticus, it says that if a man dies without issue, in other words, without children, his brother, it's not Leviticus, it's a Levitical law in Deuteronomy. And I don't have the Deuteronomic quote here. Let's see if I have it written down. Sorry, I didn't have this prepared. Yeah, anyway, it's in Deuteronomy. Oh, there it is, 25:5-10, Deuteronomy 25. So the law is if a man dies without issue, without children, and his brother is to take that woman, that wife of the first husband, and have a child by her, and then that child belongs to the dead husband. Wow! Pretty amazing, isn't that? Yeah, it's really amazing. So the question that these Sadducees were asking Jesus, from the aspect of the law, they already had it wrong. That woman who marries the brother of the dead husband still has the husband as a husband. Do you see that? In other words, the procreative part of marrying the brother-in-law was just to make sure that she had a child that could belong to the husband. She doesn't belong to the brother-in-law. She's not his wife. I mean, they call her a wife, but the original relationship, to have a child for that relationship, was the purpose of the Deuteronomic law, the Levitical law. So the question by the Sadducees right out of the gate was incorrect. And they were trying to bend the law to suit their own purposes. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this. And this, you almost, some Catholics are aware of it. I'm not sure most other Christians are, but there's the books of the Maccabees. And it was in 2nd and 4th Maccabees, I believe. I write these things down, and I'll look at my notes. I can't even read my own handwriting. In 2nd and 4th Maccabees, what happened was, it says that there's this mother and these 7 sons. And under the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes, who was a Greek Seleucid king, there had been this edict about the Jews, and there were certain things they couldn't do, or they had to eat pork to prove that they weren't, really strong in their religion or whatever. There's been some scholarship disagreement over what caused this whole thing, but the point is that this woman saw her 7 sons, and that's interesting because the Sadducees brought up what? If a woman marries 7 times, these 7 sons of hers are executed in front of her, and then she dies. We don't know whether it was by execution or by her broken heart or by suicide. We don't know, and that really doesn't matter. So you see the connection, the 7 men and the woman, right? And then in the Sadducean thing with the question to Jesus, the 7 men and the woman. So what the Sadducees were doing was they were mocking the sacrifice that these Maccabean martyrs, they're called, made. And Jesus was well aware of that because the Maccabees were one of the big reasons why millennialism came into existence amongst the Jews. The idea of the Messianists, the Messianic movement. not millennialists, messianic movements. So what we have here is Jesus being approached by Sadducees who didn't believe in the resurrection. They didn't actually cite the law the way it would work. And then they were insulting these Maccabean martyrs, all of which Jesus answered and said, you don't understand the scriptures or the power of God. And his answer to them was, because you're doing this, first of all, you're not going to receive the benefits of the resurrection because you don't have the desire in your heart for that. What is the answer to it? Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So they're not even going to see the benefits of the resurrection, much less get all of them. That's the first thing. The second thing is Jesus is saying that they don't marry in the resurrection. Because why? That's done here and there under some circumstances, but we're not going to go there right now. We're just going to talk about the fact that the Deuteronomic Levitical law is fulfilled by the brother marrying the dead the dead brother's wife, but the child of that relationship still belongs to the first brother, which is the permanent union. Second brother doesn't get to keep her in the resurrection. She returns to her original husband. Okay? That's kind of where all of that comes from. And then finally, there's the quote in Galatians, if I can find this. I wrote it down. Galatians, let's see if I can find it here. 3:25. Now, this is important because of two reasons. First is, I'm always suspect of Paul. He was a Herodian Jew. I don't know if you know what that means. We can talk about that another time. But he was also a Roman citizen. He was very much into the Greek culture. The Greeks don't believe that spirits have any sex at all. Okay? And at least at this time. And so Paul might be talking from a Greek point of view here, but I'm going to explain it anyway as to what happens through this, because he says some other things in other places that are a little different. Basically, he says, there is no male or female, there is no slave, there is no free, there is no rich man, there is no poor man. All are the same under the law. That's basically what he's saying if you go read that in Galatians 3:25. He's not saying that male and female don't exist in the spirit world, in God's kingdom. What he's saying is that they are treated fairly. See, in those days, a woman didn't have any rights. A slave didn't have any rights. A poor man really didn't have any rights. So they were equating those who were considered not to have rights with those that do, and saying that there's no difference under the law, that they'll all have rights. They'll all be recognized in the perfect law of liberty. That's what that meant, not meaning that there are no male and female. Because right in the first chapter in Genesis it says, God created man, male and female, in God's image created he them. This is a fast video. It probably doesn't explain things to the depth and breadth that I would like to, but I think it's absolutely important that I do this. I've bantered over this for a long time whether or not I should do it. But I think it's time, especially in light of all the accusations that have been made and will probably continue to be made against good men like Donald Trump, with men who are attracted to gorgeous, beautiful women. And yes, I will say it, there's nothing wrong with that. And if you're not gorgeous and beautiful, there are things you can do to make yourself more attractive. And that goes the same for men. If we're not as attractive as we should be, maybe ask your girlfriend, what can I do to make myself a little better? Or somebody who, the other sex, the women say, what can I do to make myself a little better? There's nothing wrong with that. We can all be better than we are. And we should strive to be beautiful. Why? Because we should be seeking things out that are of beauty.